meaningful information, and I'm quite sure that after that informative contribution that you have questions of your own. I am just, though, I realize that we're a couple minutes ahead of time, just a few minutes, and I'm going to exercise chairman privilege here and pose a question of my own, if you would allow. And my first question is to Hina. Luciano, you spoke passionately about the need for NPOs to provide non-financial information to accompany financial reporting. And in fact, you spoke about the legal obligation of the banking foundations in Italy to, and my Italian is not good, but you spoke to Bilancio de Mission. That's right. And that you do have NPOs who are using this information, though there's no legal obligation to do so. You also shared quite a colorful book. I had a closer look at it. Could you just share with us some of the examples of the minimum contents of this report?
I can use that.
Yes.
Yes. Oh. Of course, I know practically the question, and I asked it to Regia if it's possible to have a special slide. La regia mi può mandare quel lucido che ho chiesto prima? A quello dopo? Subito dopo. Eccolo. As you can see, this is the resoconto morale economico. Is a mission statement, performance statement of the Italian Red Cross, but it's very interesting to see that, can you put the new slide, please? Look at the date. Is 1908. The needs of non-profit organization to promote information about economic, of course, but also non-economic. In this case, is moral, ethical, is very, very important. Now, I think that I appreciated the speech of my colleague from Switzerland, because if we have different programs, we can have, the non-profit organization is a multiplicator of the richness, social richness, received money and translate in social richness. This is important to put in the financial statement, in the report. It's very, very important. And we can use that for fundraising or people raising, because we have many, many different non-profit organizations that need the people, the work of the people, as on voluntary basis instead of money. This is the possibility that we have. If we put in right just the financial aspects, I don't know if we can do that.
Okay. Thank you for that response. Now, I have a question here that came through the app, and let me declare that I'm only chair. I am not responding to questions, and I say so because this question asks specifically, what is IFAT doing to regulate a global financial reporting standard for non-profit organizations, considering the significant inflow and outflow in this sector, and to ascertain global total contribution to the world economy? And this is asked by Rotimi of Nigeria. Now, I would like to pose that question to Nigel, but if you'd allow me, Nigel, just to attach another question to it. You spoke of the ICA's position on the IFRS trust in this non-profit organization's financial reporting, and really putting an obligation on that trust. Do you believe that, considering the workload and the coverage of the IFRS trust, that they will in fact take on this responsibility? And I think you could respond to Rotimi's question as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Well, let me say, first of all, that I'm not aware of any IFAC initiative in this area at present, and it's the paucity of initiatives in this area which gave rise to the CCAB report that I referred to. So I may be wrong, but I'm not aware of any separate IFAC initiative in this area. As for other bodies, there are various ways this can be taken forward. It's true that last time around the IFRS Foundation wasn't particularly receptive to the idea of taking on not-for-profit accounting. But it did, I think it was in paragraph A4 of the February 2012 final strategy published by the trustees of the foundation. They did recognise that while for the short term, I think it was the phrase, they would continue to focus on the with-profit corporate sector, they would be considering whether it would be appropriate in the longer run to consider widening that remit. And I think the agenda review of the ISB next year, and also I believe next year is the next round of the IFRS Foundation's strategy review, are excellent opportunities for having a new debate about this topic. But IFAC was mentioned there, and I don't think the IFRS Foundation is the only possible means of taking this forward, certainly in the initial stages. I mentioned the CCAB bodies in Ireland and the UK. They are meeting again next month to consider what else, if anything, they might do in this area. I seem to recall that UNCTAD, the United Nations Trade and Development Body, took on developing an international standard for SMEs around a decade ago, in view of the lack of any other initiatives in that area. And it was that initiative which was quite instrumental in persuading the ISB that there was indeed international demand for an IFRS for SMEs. And I'm also conscious of the fact that the International Integrated Reporting Council has made very rapid progress in promoting the ideas and principles of integrated reporting with fairly limited resources and in quite a rapid period of time. And they did that through a very interesting model of establishing a very broad consultative committee, a council I think it was called, and getting a lot of buy-in from organisations around the world, and it propelled the ideas forward quite substantially, quite quickly. So I think there are various ways of doing this, and it'd be interesting to see where we get to over the next year or two on that.
Okay, thank you. No, I will not comment on IFAC's initiatives in this area, but I can say before I move on to the next question that IFAC publishes its financial reporting in keeping with IPSAS, and that is consistent with not-for-profit organizations internationally as well. Now, at this time, I will invite others to come to the front and utilize the mic to pose your question. While you make your way to the front, I'll just pose a question to Tadashi. And Tadashi, I got from your presentation that your institute, the JICPA, has been working earnestly in this area. What has been your government's response to the initiatives undertaken by your institute?
Generally, we have a very good support in general, but I think it's somehow because of it's a very preliminary stage of discussions. Maybe it's almost same thing happening in the something we have to change something or reform something. In very first stage, we get general support, but we go forward for more concrete and detailed discussions. A little bit of hesitation and resistance for reform. So I personally reasonably expect in the future from some hesitation or even resistance on the reform. But as far as at this stage, we have very good support for constituents from including our government.
Okay, thank you. And my final question to Rito. Rito, Sweden seemed to be at the forefront of this not-for-profit accounting, financial reporting. Do you have any do's and don'ts to share with us in this area?
We definitely have, and until I have been invited to this conference, I was not really aware that we were on the forefront. So we were really concentrating on our standard and standard setting. But the thing is, and obviously we could discuss probably the whole day on the question of what an NPO or a not-for-profit, a non-profit really is. And in Switzerland, we are probably in a particular situation. Our standard focus is, I would say, on smaller NPOs. And the ones that have a lot of donators and have a certain, let's say, public mean in Switzerland. But then we'll have out of Geneva, for example, the really international huge NPOs. And we recently had a discussion with these organizations, for example, the International Red Cross organization, and so far, if I'm correct, they do apply IFRS. And other ones in Geneva too, so they are, and they're probably benchmarking and talking to each other, they are applying IFRS, but they are not happy with the IFRS solution, so they consider to change to Ipsas, but they are not happy with that too. Then they invited us, the Swiss GAAP FAIR Commission, but I told them that's probably not the right standard really for an international organization or an NPO with a billion turnover or balance sheet. So the interesting thing for us in Switzerland really would also, or is the question, how do we deal with these international NPOs? And then we'll come back to the question that Nigel raised, is there for these organizations really a need for one international standard?
Okay, questions from the floor? Yes. Please introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you. I'm Olugbenga Kuka from ICANN. Yeah, my question is about the presentations made. We can see that more of the initiatives going on nationally are inspired by IFRS and fewer by Ipsas. From Tadasha's presentation, he actually suggests we go the opposite direction. And he said we should be doing, basing more of these frameworks on Ipsas than IFRS. And I tend to agree with that because he gave a very important reason. He said most of the funds going to NGOs are non-exchange transactions. Nigel mentioned in his presentation that in the UK you have about 116 billion going into the sector annually. And these are mostly non-exchange transactions. And if you look at IFRS, there is absolutely no guidance on handling this. If you have this provision already in Ipsas, is it not a better starting point to start thinking of a standard based on Ipsas rather than IFRS? I will add a second reason to what Tadasha said, apart from the issue of non-exchange transaction, and that relates to what the prof has said. And he said something like, if you look at the fundamental objectives of NGOs, they are not there to make profit. Most of Ipsas are based on the private profit-making sector. So, and if you look at the way NGOs account, outcome budgeting seems to be a more relevant approach for them. And these provisions are already in Ipsas. So why not start from Ipsas and start adapting to the specific needs of NGOs? Because in the UK, for example, most of the standards have been based on IFRS anyway. And since 1988, when they started, they haven't, sorry to say, they are not there yet. Don't you think it's better to step back and see if they're on the wrong track and try this alternative approach suggested by Tadasha? Thank you.
My name is Robert Donaldi, speaking from Ghana. Would the panel agree with me if in a country or in an environment where there are no standards for NPOs. One agreed to pick some standards from IFRS, some from IPSAS, join together and come up with your financial statement. Will you agree with me to be the right approach to go? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so what we heard just now is a suggestion being made that IPSAS be used as the base point for developing a standard for NPOs and enhancing as necessary. But then we're also hearing another suggestion that we pick the applicable standards from both frameworks, IFRS and IPSAS, and utilize that to develop a best fit for NPOs. Your views on that? Would you like to go, Lucian? Yes.
Well, I think there are certainly different approaches that could be adopted to this, and both the suggestions are very sensible ones. Interestingly, in the UK, from the 1st of January 2015, so 6 weeks' time, we are moving to a brand new regime for all non-IFRS reporters, a whole new set of standards for private companies and all other UK GAAP reporters, which includes the not-for-profit sector. They are the new standards. In fact, it's principally just one standard, is based very closely on the IFRS for SMEs. And we've been looking to reform UK GAAP for about 10 years now, and conscious of the fact that it's applied by a wide range of entities, not just private with-profit companies. And originally the proposition was that we would develop a separate standard for not-for-profit entities. Well, after this was debated and for a long time, the solution we finally reached is to have one standard. It's based very closely on the IFRS for SMEs, and to make it applicable, appropriate for not-for-profit entities, we've just added a few sections, not very many, to the section 34, which those of you who know the IFRS for SMEs will recall it's the specialised activities chapter of the IFRS for SMEs. We've added a few sections there which are just for not-for-profit entities on concessionary loans, not-for-profit, on non-exchange transactions, and a couple of other areas. And that standard then applies from January to the entire not-for-profit sector as well as the private sector, where accruals accounts are being prepared. So, you know, that's one way of doing it. That's taken 10 years of debate to get to that stage. There's still debates about which entities should prepare accruals accounts. At the moment, the majority don't, as I mentioned. So there's a very important debate about a cut-off here. I think there's a very big difference between the big international charities with multi-million pounds income and a small community-based development organisation. You know, we have to recognise the very real differences there, and there are important things, as has been suggested, other than financial reporting. I do think financial reporting is critical. It's one of a number of very important areas we need to look at if we're going to have an efficient and accountable not-for-profit sector. Governance and so on is critical as well. So various ways of doing that, and certainly there are some good aspects of both IFRS and IPSAS that could be brought to bear when considering what works best for global not-for-profit entities, and to which entities a new international product would apply, I think would be one of the most interesting parts of the debate.
Okay, thank you.
Just a few words in addition. No, this is my personal opinion, but I think that the standard for financial statement is very, very important. But we must have a standard of no-profit organization everywhere in the world. Because if each country invented every day a new form of new-profit organization, it's very difficult at the end to have one system for financial state with different things. That is a problem for me. So before we must do the standard. If we spoke about banks, banks is bank everywhere in the world. In manufacturing industry is everywhere in the world is the same. It's not the same situation for non-profit organization. So it's correct that we discuss about the standard, auditing standard, accounting principle, but before we must have an idea, common idea of non-profit in the world. We are very, very far from this here.
If you have an ideal world, we may have 3 sets of the international accounting standards. One is for business entity, and the other is public sector, and third one is not-for-profit. But I think it will happen in some years later, but the things cannot happen so quickly. So as far as at this moment, as the Pamela chairs indicate that IFARC itself is a non-government international organization, actually applied IPSAS directly. And another good example for is the New Zealand case is, if I understand correctly, New Zealand now requires a private sector not-for-profit for apply the IPSAS. It's with minor modification for New Zealand circumstances. It's New Zealand IPSAS. So I think at the time being that it's one of the options is application of IPSAS is one of the options. And IPSAS is draws lots of the literature from takes from the IFRS itself. So I don't think that it's a mixture approach. We don't need it. Actually, IPSAS is almost in some part of the business type of transaction, it's almost identical to IFRS. So that's, for time being, straight application of IPSAS is one of the options for the international global NGO type of organization. And in addition to that, non-financial type of performance reporting, I think IPSAS has a performance reporting project, also that it will be applicable to the for reference for the not-for-profit entities.
I have a word on why shouldn't there be a competition between accounting standard setters or accounting standards? I think there is a need on an international level for international organizations. But on a national level, I do not see the problem if the accounting standard setting of NPOs is a little bit different in Italy than in the UK, than in the Switzerland, because the people involved in this organization, they do not care about how accounting of NPO will be done in the UK or Italy. They want to understand what in Switzerland happens and probably also what is the background, where they come from. And so it's a cultural thing. And therefore, if it's not about the international one, that's different. But the other ones, I think diversity will work. And my personal view is, but probably I'm alone here on the podium, is that there is not a need really for one international standards on NPO.
Okay, thank you. Allow me to share with you a contribution from a member of the audience. I think a basic and I'm quoting here, I think a basic statement of affair and schedule of assets and liabilities will be okay as a minimum reporting, since they will not be assessed to tax by government. And of course, the person is indicating this is my opinion. I'm not so sure the person is very far off from what you are saying, Rito, in this regard. But there's an interesting question here. Are churches regarded as not-for-profit organizations? I think that's a good question to end with today. Well, with a few minutes to spare, I believe we have come to the end of our session today. Is there another question? You want okay, they want an answer. They're demanding an answer.
The answer is sometimes.
Okay, thank you. So please join me in thanking the panelists for a most informative and stimulating discussion. And this brings us to the end of our session. Thank you.